I'm going to go back to some of the artifacts from Burrows cave. There's actually a lot of stones that were pulled out of that cave that depict that Jesus Christ was known by the people who lived there. I mean, it seems like the cave depicted an extended period of time of history, but there's definitely some history that, once again, depicts knowledge of Jesus Christ. And you could see the donkey. I guess he rode in on the donkey, but not as a small child. And it does have the star over the inn and a cross, the Yohewah symbol symbolizing Jehovah. And you've got another one here where it's a symbol of righteousness. He's got the marking in the wrist, Yohewah there, listed in the sun. And these writings right here, this I've deduced this symbol to mean to rise. But here you've got the LTLH, or Lamed Tau Lamed Hey. I dropped Lamed Tau Lamed Hey into Google Translate, and it says to hang. That's incredible to me. Then I got another one here, and I think this one, Wayne, is this your artifact? Do you own this? Wayne May owns this artifact. I think the other ones are owned by the White family. I'm not really sure. It's been hard for me to sort out who owns what, because they're in private collections. And here you've got another one, the hand with the marking in the wrist, the 3 crosses, symbol of righteousness. What really just amazes me is this middle line. That's a Yod-Heh, a modern Hebrew Psalmic, a Hey and a Wah. Yod-Heh Sahewah. That sounds a lot like Jesus, And this one's just an artistic drawing of one of the stones. There was one particular person whose name escapes me right now, but he did a lot of drawings of them before Russell would sell them. And I think he's missing the marking in the wrist, but it's definitely, it certainly looks like a depiction of Jesus walking on the water. We got the 4 sacred words, which are on many of the artifacts, but when I drop the Hebrew into here, this comes out as he came to, and that's the letter P. Well, who did he come to? He came to Peter walking on the water. Then you got an L and a K, laleket. You can drop LK into the Hebrew dictionary, it's the word walk. Then to rise up. He walked, risen up above the water. This is an Egyptian water symbol, by the way. And then this one's very interesting to me also, because he's come out of the city gate. He's placed on the cross, has the Yohewah right there. It has the arm or the hand with the marking in the wrist. Then he's carried to the tomb, marking of 3 days. 3 days, 3 nights in the tomb, and then he comes out with his arms outstretched. I'm not looking up the verse in 3rd Nephi, but when he arrived in 3rd Nephi, he embraced the Nephites. And I worked these writings. There's a lot of Hebrew words in here, but I did work the translation of this one. I'm not going to go over the great detail, but what it says is a nation of wicked people. Upon the cross, what was that? Oh, he wailed. That's what it was. Upon the cross, he wailed. I worked it with Adam Stokes. The two of us kind of worked it together, and this is the Hebrew word for wailed. And then on the 3rd morning, this is more of an Ojibwe symbol, and this is just a number 3. The 3rd morning, he rose. Then you got it's a doke. Okay, then you got some symbols, I don't know what they say. But then that's the word embrace. A gimel pay, and that's to embrace in Hebrew. So I just thought that was amazing. So, it's like a morphing language. It's not pure Hebrew, but it's got Hebrew in it, and it's got a little bit of Demotic Egyptian, a little bit of Ojibwe in it, and it validates the 3 days in the tomb. Utahna Jessup is a writer, field rep, and a copy editor for Ancient American Magazine, and a trustee for the Ancient Historical Research Foundation. She has a particular interest in historical archaeology and ancient inscriptions and has participated in archaeological digs. Utahna has given firesides on Native American history and prophecy, ancient cultures, petroglyphs, and the Book of Mormon. She loves all things ancient, as well as reading, researching, hiking, and exploring the great outdoors. She's a great researcher. So, Utahna Jessup. Thank you. Everybody see hers.
Where do you want this?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. How does this sound? Can you hear me out there? Okay. Well, good afternoon, brothers and sisters. It is such a great honor to be asked to come and speak with you today, especially about our Savior, Jesus Christ. I can't think of a more wonderful subject or a more humbling subject to tackle. Like many of you, I've long been a student of the Holy Scriptures, and I have a great love for the history of the Book of Mormon. I believe that most of us would agree that the highlight of that sacred record is the appearance of the Savior of the world, coming here and walking among the men, women, and children of this continent, teaching them, loving them, and leaving an everlasting imprint on their souls. It was so glorious when he came, deeply sorrowful when he left, but he left us all a solemn promise that one day he would return. So I'd like to share with you some of the stories of his time here, when he visited the ancestors of our Native American peoples. Stories so beautiful that these cherished moments were immortalized by the telling and the retelling, one generation to another, throughout the eons of time. Traditionally, stories were shared in the wintertime. Family and friends would gather together in their teepees, kivas, lodges, council houses, even outside in the open air. So today you'll see I don't have a PowerPoint, but I'm hoping that we can have a little more of that coziness like they had when they shared these type of stories. So these stories exist not only in their oral histories, but also in the written records, long since hidden from the eyes of the world. In the words of Buffalo Tiger of the Miccosukee, some of these records were kept from before the crossing of the Great Waters. Others were written after the arrival here. Some of these stories contained in the records tell of Yahweh and his visit to the Indians. When he appeared, there was a blinding light, a voice from heaven spoke, and a shining star appeared. When Yahweh came to teach the people the right way to peace and life, he also taught them how to cook, when to plant, when to harvest. He had special powers to heal the sick, and he taught that if the children would be obedient to their parents, they would live a long time. Now, when he left, he promised the people that he would return. At this point, Buffalo Tiger could not say more, because he said the ancient records kept on thin sheets of gold were buried in a hill in New York and lost. Many missionaries have told how the Native people, hearing the teachings of the Book of Mormon for the first time, recognize both the teachings and the history as their own, having been taught these things all their lives. A young Chippewa woman recognized the Book of Mormon the first time she saw it before she had even read it, and she knew that it was true and contained the teachings meant for her people. How did she know? Well, when she was a little girl, only about 6 years old, she lived with her grandparents in a teepee. One bitter, cold, snowy day, they woke up and they had no food. Her grandparents went to find some. So leaving her alone in the teepee with a fire going, they promised to return. But as hours stretched on and night had fallen, the fire went out, wolves began to howl, she was terribly frightened and began to pray to get to Manitou, the Great Spirit. A bright light filled the teepee and a visitor appeared. He told her not to fear and that her grandparents would soon return and they were bringing food. He showed her a book that he had brought and told her to watch for 2 men that would someday bring her this book containing the true religion of the Indian people. A Hopi elder tells us this: the white people have the scriptures written in books which they leave sitting on a shelf where they gather dust, and many do not know what is between the covers. But I am Hopi. I wait for my white brother. I have the sacred scriptures from your Mormon book memorized and written in my heart, where it will never gather dust. I will take my knowledge beyond this life into the hereafter, and will never lose it. Never forsake your religion for another, and always remember the teachings you have been taught in your Mormon book, and you will receive everlasting life. Shooting Star of the Lakota people was adamant. Tell the young men to listen. These legends of the ancient times, they are the blood which courses through our veins. Farther back through the cycles of time, we knew the great Wakanta, but we forgot his words. Perhaps recounting some of those legends today will remind all of us of the things that he taught. Indeed, the Son of God visited the peoples of this land long, long ago. These legends come from a variety of sources, such as the wonderful collection in the book He Walked the Americas. We have much to learn of he who was known by many names. Names such as the prophet, the healer, the pale one, the feathered serpent, Jesus, the god of the dawn star. Each family, tribe, or nation chose a name for him in their own language, so we have all kinds of names. Hurricane, Wakanta, Shinab, Wakea, Quetzalcoatl, Tacoma, the list goes on and on. These names were unique to him and often carried the meaning, the god of the dawn star, or the Lord of wind and water, to honor his command of the winds and the waves and the elements of Mother Earth and Father Sky. The ancients captured these moments in songs, chants, and legends using very poetic language, which I think is very typical of a people that live so closely with nature. Now, some say that his first arrival was on a sailing ship with sails resembling giant graceful birds floating across the great deep, with him walking upon the waters of the ocean and then coming up on the sand completely dry. Others say he came to them on foot, walking from village to village, carrying a great staff. Here's a description. Upon the summit stood the healer, incense swirling above him with the scent of burning cedar, with pale jade sunlight falling softly upon the white folds of his long white toga, slightly tinting his golden sandals, his soft curled beard, light brown hair, and the captivating iridescence of his gray-green eyes. His fame spread across the land. The people greatly anticipated his coming to their own village, and in preparation they would often make for him a set of clothing. Usually it was a long white robe with black crosses embroidered around the hem and golden sandals. He accepted these gifts with gratitude and would leave his old worn robe and sandals behind for them. There was power in the things that he touched, and his clothing was used to heal the sick long after he was gone. The stories of his arrival in this land, though, actually began with his earthly death on Calvary's Hill in Jerusalem, which caused a great cataclysm here in America. The Paiute people in central Utah often gathered at a place called the Parowan Gap to perform special ceremonies and teach the youth their history. The Ute chief Walkera called this place God's own house. There's a large rock formation on one side of this gap, and it looks like a human face in profile. It symbolized Tobats, their name for the Great Spirit. On the opposite side of the gap is a sandstone hoodoo, or a rock formation that looks like an Indian brave with feathers in his hair. This symbolized the Son of God, Shinab, the peacemaker, who was full of love for all men. Here's one of their stories. When the evil one killed Shinab, a great darkness fell upon the earth, absolute blackness for 3 days. There was chaos and confusion, weeping and wailing in the darkness, when suddenly they heard the booming voice of Tobats, the Father, speaking to them from the top of the mountain. He instructed them to reach out in the darkness and join hands with whomever they touched, forming one long chain of people in the darkness. Then they were to take turns crying out for husbands, wives, and children one at a time until these families could be reunited, still in the darkness. When this was accomplished, though, the crying ceased. The voice then told them to climb to the top of the mountain where Tobots was and form a circle around him, at which time Tobots shot an arrow straight up, which pierced the darkness, producing a small light that grew like an explosion until it flooded all the land. And thus the Indians remember this great event from a distant past. Of course, there's a similar story in the Book of Mormon of a great destruction, 3 days of darkness, a voice from heaven, and Jesus descending from the sky, illuminating the world with a hope and a promise of a glorious resurrection. Dr. Hugh Newbley was told that story by a member of the Paiute tribe. Not long after that, he was visiting the Hopi people down in Arizona and was given the rare privilege of being shown their most sacred and holy possession, the Hopi stone tablet. Gazing at the tablet's inscription, he noticed a similar theme: the wanderings of the people, upheavals of nature, an arrow chained to heaven, and light descending from the clouds. Now, this Hopi stone was beautifully done in highly polished porphyry. That's a royal purple-red stone that was highly prized in antiquity and commonly found along the beaches and shorelines of North America. One unique thing about it was that the corner of the stone tablet had been broken off at some point, and the Hopi were promised by their lost white brother, Pahana, that he would someday return to them, dressed in a red cloak or cap in the pattern of a horned lizard. To prove it was really him, he would bring with him the missing corner piece of the stone. Now, if you think about that, that's very symbolic. The scriptures say that Jesus is the chief cornerstone. Now, the Savior worked mighty miracles among the ancient ones. His eyes flashed with anger when he came upon terrible wars and horrible sacrifices. Yet, after chastising the people, he healed the injured, raised the dead, and taught them all to live in peace and love one another. Even animals were captivated and healed by him. The Cherokee people tell how he came across a lost fawn in a moonlit forest. After inquiring about its mother, the fawn led him to her. She had protected her fawn from a tiger attack and was mortally wounded. The healer gently stroked her torn and bleeding body until vitality was restored. As she stood and nuzzled her little fawn, those who had seen the miracle happen could hardly believe their eyes, and they asked him, "Art thou not afraid that using thy power on the animal kingdom, someday it shall be gone when you most need it?" "Nay," smiled the pale prophet, "there cannot be too many good deeds. More precious in my Father's eyes is a good deed than the most exquisite jewel. A lost lamb is as important as saving a nation, if one need not choose between the two." He also healed a little child that had been attacked by a jaguar. When he turned and was confronted by the wild cat, he spoke, "Soft-footed chief, come close to receive my Father's blessing. Forgiven thou art for the pangs of thy hunger. Go and claw little children no more." The jaguar lay down before him, rolled cat-like to show its pleasure, and invited the caress of his slim, pale fingers. In Canada, he was known to have been followed by 2 wolves. They clearly would not harm him, for he had a strange power over the animals, as even the fiercest sought his touch. He had laughed when the wolves offered to escort and protect him. Yet there they were, following him from one village to another, the people sadly watching him go as the first snowflakes danced in the sky. The pines dripped ice like unlit candles as he walked, his long hair and snowy garments silvered by his frosty breath. The wolves, one white and one a dark silver, followed the healer as they faded into the whiteness like a wisp of smoke and disappeared in a sea of swirling snowflakes. On to another place, I'm sure. One of his great miracles took place along the shores of the Sunrise Ocean, the Atlantic. The prophet knew that the legends told to the children about wars between animals were in truth the histories of the people. Often he had read these ancient stories. Well, he knew that the name serpent meant water and stood for the earth's sea people who had once ruled the oceans. One of his favorite books was called Proof That I Am a Serpent. It was an ancient history of the sea people from the day when the red land of these serpents, along with their colonies, fleets of ocean-going vessels, all went down in the fury of volcanic destruction in the cold green depths of the ocean. The book was written by the last remaining grandson of the House of Wotan to leave the doomed homeland, and it contained an eyewitness account of the event that honestly sounds very much like the destruction of the island of Atlantis. Whenever he touched the book, he saw its final destruction, burned to ashes by the Spanish conquistadors. The prophet told the priesthood to send out copies to many nations so at least one copy might escape the flames. Some modern writers claim that the serpent Wotan helped build the Tower of Babel and lead people to America after the confusion of tongues. Just an interesting tidbit from history there. In the land of Panuco, the healer met many merchants and saw ancient cities, some in ruins and some still living. Into these ports came the traders, still bringing copper down from Lake Superior to the Southern Sea and the Sunrise Ocean. He received an invitation to ride into the Pawn cities, knowing these people were a lost colony from the sunken Red Land. He was most anxious to meet them. Thus, the healer rode northward into a large city in the land now known as Georgia. Here he built a pyramid temple with painted logs, as was the custom, and dedicated it to the Great Spirit. The ancient city in Georgia for a time carried the name Ishikawa, the Lord of Wind and Water. He had noted that at each of the landing sites of the sea people fleeing the destruction, they had sent up a prayer of thanksgiving. They continued this Thanksgiving celebration every year, followed by a feast of corn, beans, tomatoes, squash, potatoes, melons, and berries, along with deer, buffalo, turkey, and a drink of delicious chocolate. When he learned of this, he gave them his blessing and made it one of the feasts of the temple. So how's that for a first Thanksgiving? Quetzalcoatl, the Lord of the Dawn Stars, he was known in Mexico, seemed to enjoy the past, but was often deeply troubled by thoughts of the future. He saw visions and prophesied events that would happen many calendar cycles in the future. The ancients actually used 4 interrevolving calendars. Oh, incidentally, this would explain the discrepancy in the Book of Mormon when Samuel the Lamanite prophesied of Christ's birth. The sign was to appear in 5 years, yet the wicked people tried to put to death the believers, claiming that the 5 years were up, when indeed they were not. The sign appeared a few days later, so perhaps they were using different calendars. The ancients actually used the solar calendar as we have now, the lunar calendar, the tropical calendar, and the Venus calendar. Jesus, the Lord of the Dawn Star, followed the Venus calendar. It was well known that he greatly revered the dawn star, Venus, which is both the morning and the evening star, depending on the time of year, of course. They explained that the number of the dawn star is 13 because it makes 13 revolutions in the same amount of time that the Earth makes 8, and therefore, among many tribes, the Earth's number is 8 and Venus' number is 13. So if you combine that with the sun's revolution around its governing body, which we know of as K.E. Van Rash, there must be 8 of those 13, so 8 times 13 equals 104 years to bring everything back into the same position, the original position, if you can follow me here. One full cycle of the dawn star is then 104 years. Just before he left Colula, Mexico, he walked the people through the cycles of the dawn star and foretold the coming of the invasion of the white man, which turns out to be, for the people he was talking to, it was Cortez and his army when they conquered the Aztecs. This marks the beginning of this prophecy he gave. He said, 3 ships will come bringing the warring strangers, pale, bearded men in suits of shining metal carrying rods which speak with thunder and kill at a distance. I see them kneeling under the shadow of the cross that they brought with them, but they are children of war. They have but one love, and that is for weapons. Ever more horrible are these weapons. Should they reach for the one that is ultimate, there will be no forgiveness. Keep hidden your books, my children. The day will come when they will be precious. When the warring strangers march to power, carry your books into the jungles. Place your histories deeply in the caverns, where none of these men can find them. Do not bring them back into the sunlight until the war cycle is over. And then he said, know that the end will come in 5 full cycles of the dawn star. So, Cortez and his army arrived in 1520. 5 full cycles of the dawn star is 520 years. So the year 2040 would mark the end of the war cycle and a safe time for the ancient records of Mexico to be brought forth. Isn't that interesting? Mark you well, he said, the dawn star shall cross the heavens, and all the people looking upward shall remember tonight, and the words of Quetzal. To help you remember, I have caused to be carved a giant boulder, highly polished and marked forever with the dawn star's future cycles. I believe that is what is known today as the Aztec calendar stone. It's in a museum in Mexico City. It is 12 feet wide, 3 feet thick, and weighs 25 tons. He definitely made it to withstand the ages. Always up before the sun, the god of the dawn star could be seen at first light, atop hills or small mountains, kneeling in prayer to the Great Spirit Wakantanka. This great miracle worker, whose every move bespoke kindness, whose touch revealed his divinity, taught the people mysteries of theology and a great many life lessons. He told them, I have brought you seeds for medicine, food and clothing, spices and the warm sweet chocolate. I taught you ceremonies, baptisms and sacred marriage, and all about the one great spirit who dwells beyond the rainbow, moves in the oceans, breathes in the windstorm, and created all things. Too soon, it was time for him to go. The feathers of their souls were drooping when the god of the dawn star thus moved into the sunrise. A beautiful creature of peace and laughter, whose long, curling brown hair trapped the red gold of sunlight, and whose sparkling green eyes danced like the water in light and shadow, forever holding the sea's deepest mysteries. His voice, deeply resonant like rolling thunder, now echoes through time. One day, he said, you will see me returning even as I came, through the golden light of the dawning. Keep my commandments and love one another. And so, they dance in ceremony, ancient steps of intricate rhythm expressing their deepest devotion for their beloved Messiah. His name is given to rushing rivers, majestic mountains, sacred forests, and springs of sparkling living water. His sacred signs and symbols are artistically woven into everyday life, carved upon the canyon walls, burned into pottery, shared in the medicine lodges, weaved into blankets, danced in the sacred circle, and lifted to heaven in song and prayer on the wings of the mighty eagles. They look to the east, searching for signs in the stars, patiently anticipating, as are we, the glorious return of our bright and morning star, Jesus the Christ. Thank you so much.